What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 17 NFL game picks, locks, outright, on the spread, the final week of the NFL regular season. But fear not, we will be back with this come the playoffs. So make sure to tune in if you guys enjoy. Hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there, asking us your questions and seeing our thoughts on these games as it gets closer to kickoff. And better yet, sign up for our free newsletter at alldaypigskin.com if you want early access to all these game picks. All those details in the description. But for now, let's get right into it. Before getting into our breakdowns, I want to give you guys a quick word from our sponsors at Overlay Fantasy Sports, who are taking DFS to a whole nother level. And I specifically want to highlight their matchup shop function, which is an absolute blast. In fact, we've been using it since the start of the NFL season because, let's face it, betting on the same old Team A versus Team B can get a little bit stale, a little bit boring. Well, that's not even close to being the case with the matchup shop of Overlay Fantasy, as it allows you to bet on individual player matchups, and it's super simple. Just pick whichever player you think will have the higher fantasy performance. And just like a regular bet would work, check out the spreads, do your research, and then win some money. You can bet on pretty much any single sport that you want, whether it's NFL, golf, MLB, etc. All those options are there. And again, super simple. Pretty much for any single NFL game coming up, you've got a bunch of different matchups that are always updated and added to. So if it's something as simple as just putting a single submission, you can do that. But guess what? If you want to get a parlay going and double up some of those winnings, you can do that as well. So take advantage of this. All of that homework you're doing for your fantasy lineups, let's have that translate to some big time winnings for your wallet as well. So do yourself a favor and check out Overlay Fantasy's matchup shop now. We kick off our full Sunday divisional slate with the Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Bucks. The Falcons 4-11 after a narrow loss, somewhat expected though, versus the Kansas City Chiefs, where they choked away yet another possible victory, while the Tampa Bay Bucks 10-5 absolutely demolished the Detroit Lions. And here, this game pretty much comes down to one question. Will the Tampa Bay starters, and probably mainly Tom Brady here, play in this game, and if so, for how long? Now, if the answer to the above question is yes, and it's for the majority of the game, then this should be an open and shut case. However, if we only see a quarter or two from the Bucs starters, which is honestly what we expect, as they don't have much to play for in this game, then don't be shocked to see Atlanta maybe mess around and come close to a victory here. Now, I don't want to give them too much credit because we know how skilled the Falcons are at losing close games, which I could see this being. And only a couple of weeks ago, we saw the Bucs struggle with scoring the football versus the Atlanta Falcons. They needed a come from behind victory to get that W. But as things stand right now, what we're saying is we're going to split the difference. And considering the shortcomings the Falcons have defensively, rushing the football, protecting the quarterback. Note, Julio Jones will not be playing here yet again for Atlanta. Maybe we should have let off with that, but at this point, that's become a known fact, it seems like. We're going to have to lean the way of the Tampa Bay Bucks, even if they start resting their guys at some point in time. In our opinion, as far as betting is concerned, the real value here will probably be on the spread, because Tampa Bay is getting almost 7 points at -6.5 currently, and that seems like way too high of a number for a team that has scoring inconsistencies and is probably looking ahead to the playoffs at this time. So for that reason, we will go with the Bucks outright. That is the safer pick here, but on the spread, we think the Falcons have some really good value. Next up, we have got the Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. If you're looking for a bit of a more enticing game, this should definitely be it, as there are some playoff implications here, specifically on the side of the Dolphins. Miami comes in at 10-5 after a miraculous come-from-behind victory versus the Raiders, where their two-quarterback system was on display yet again, Tua getting benched in favor of Ryan Fitzpatrick, who leads the team back to get that W and keep their playoff hopes alive, showing us why he has earned the name Ryan Fitzmagic. While the Bills 12-3, they've locked up the division after stomping the New England Patriots. And now the question is, what will they do with their starters? Because the Bills are being coy here, primarily with the status of Josh Allen. But if we had to guess, we would say that we don't think Allen plays. And if he does by some chance, it probably won't be for all that long in this game. Because ask yourself, if you're the Buffalo Bills, you're very much so a legitimate contender in the AFC, probably right behind the Kansas City Chiefs. So if you want to actually go on a long run in the playoffs, you need your roster to be healthy, especially with there only being one bye week this year. And for that reason, why risk a freak injury to, God forbid, Josh Allen or to one of your other key weapons? For that reason, we think that the Buffalo Bills at some point in time, if not right away, will be resting those big name players. So that's the biggest storyline here that you need to pay attention to as far as betting purposes are concerned. The status of those starters, primarily Josh Allen. As far as the Miami Dolphins, this might be the exact advantage they need to punch their ticket into the playoffs, because we know they've had offensive issues scoring the football, and on paper, at full strength, the Bills are the better team in terms of that category. Now, to be fair, the Dolphins will be without Ryan Fitzpatrick in this game. He tests positive for COVID, so it will be Tua or bust. But again, due to the situation that's at hand here for the Buffalo Bills and them likely resting starters, we think the Dolphins get this victory. If you guys want to play it safe, like we said, for betting purposes, wait until we get closer to Sunday if you want to put big money on this game. But if you're looking for great value early on, then what we're doing is going with Miami outright and on the spread, because right now they are underdogs, the Bills at -4.5. Moving on, we've got the Baltimore Ravens at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Ravens 10-5 after beating the Giants last week, while the Bengals 4-10-1 after their shootout victory over the Houston Texans. And technically, the Ravens haven't clinched a playoff berth yet, but thankfully for them, it's a simple scenario. Win and you are in. And again, thankfully for them, they get the Cincinnati Bengals, who, in our opinion, all but guarantee the Ravens get a shot at the playoffs. And again, we realize that, okay, the Bengals are on a bit of a winning streak, but guys, there's no chance that it continues versus an upward trending Baltimore team that has everything to play for here. We anticipate that the Ravens and Lamar Jackson are going to be able to score at will versus this Bengals defense. And on the flip side, the Bengals will have a much tougher time versus this Baltimore defense compared to facing Houston, one of the worst defenses in the NFL last week. The only remote question mark about this game is the spread. Right now at +11.5, one of the largest of the week. And if the Ravens go up big here, they could potentially rest their starters and allow the Bengals to get some garbage time points. That should be your only worry. As like we said, the outright pick here is a lock. But however, at the end of the day, even with the spread, we just think the gap between these two teams pretty much on every level is too large. So we're leaning Baltimore on the spread too. We expect a huge game from Lamar Jackson, that rushing attack as well. Continue with the formula that's worked for Baltimore as of late as they get a decisive victory here. Continuing on, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Cleveland Browns. The Steelers 12-3 after their great come-from-behind victory versus the Colts, while the Browns 10-5 after losing to the New York Jets this last week. And man, how much easier it would be for the Browns this week if they had just beaten the Jets last week. Now, if they want to get into the playoffs, they have to win this game, really putting themselves in a situation where it's win or go home. Now, luckily for them, the Pittsburgh Steelers have come out and said that Ben Roethlisberger ain't playing in this game. That's a huge help because, hey, we remember from last year what this team looked like without Big Ben, specifically Mason Rudolph under center, who has been named the starter. And simply put, offensively, they were tragic. Now, they've still got a good defense, to be fair, even though it's kind of waned this last month, injuries, situations like that. But it's still going to put up a fight versus any team, honestly. The problem is they won't be able to rely on their offense for much. That's why, on paper, at full strength, we'd be going with the Steelers here, but the Browns maybe catch a little bit of a break by Big Ben being rested. But on their end, how much of that will be counteracted by the fact that they're having a seriously inopportune outbreak of COVID cases? You know, that definitely played a role in terms of their loss to the Jets last week. Pretty much every single wide receiver on that team was unavailable. So offensively, they were kind of behind the eight ball. Now, thankfully, some of those guys will be returning, but, you know, there's still some other players that haven't cleared that protocol. And what that means is that in this game, the X factor will be Baker Mayfield. He has to play relatively well if the Browns want to get in, because we envision that this is going to be a low-scoring game, probably pretty close. We know the Steelers aren't going to put up a lot of points with Mason Rudolph, but at the same time, we don't anticipate that their defense will absolutely fall apart. We know that Baker Mayfield can be inconsistent, even though he's had, for the most part, a good year this season. So what are we going to get in this contest offensively from the Browns? That's a bit of a question mark. Right now, we tend to give the advantage to the Cleveland Browns just because, you know, Mason Rudolph, plain and simple, he's not a good NFL quarterback. And offensively, you know, it was a struggle last year for the Steelers to get double-digit points. And we tend to believe that the Browns can do that at least. And then defensively, you know, they can get after Mason Rudolph. They don't need to be great when going up versus that caliber of quarterback. So at the end of the day, you know, this is definitely one of the tougher get-in playoff scenarios with the Browns. But they catch a bit of a break with Big Ben out. We like them to win outright. The spread, however, -6.5 for the Browns. We tend to think that is a little bit too high in a game that we said probably going to be closer than you expect. The Browns are going to have to work for it here. We actually really like the Pittsburgh Steelers on the spread. Next up, we got the Dallas Cowboys at the New York Giants. The Cowboys 6-9 after beating the Eagles last week, and then the Giants 5-10 after losing to the Ravens. And this is one of those rare games on the week in Week 17 where both teams have everything to play for, as a win could lead to a playoff appearance. Now, granted, it would need some outside help, mainly Washington losing their game on Sunday night, but more on that later. What we need to know here is that as of late, the Cowboys have had some offensive success as Dalton has seemingly gotten more comfortable with the plethora of offensive weapons at his disposal. Wide receiver, running back, you get the point. On the flip side, the Giants, they're going to have to rely on their defense per usual, as offensively they have, again, still, even with Daniel Jones back, a suspect offensive line, and Jones, who is hampered, which is clearly taking away from his mobility that he relies on so much. And while the Dallas defense might be one of the easier matchups, granted, the Giants have faced as of late, we just don't have enough faith in the Giants offensively to keep pace with the scoring of Dallas. And again, that's not to say the Cowboys will have an offensive explosion, but if this is a game that's a close one where all you need is 20 to 23 points to win, we trust the Cowboys a lot more. The spread is practically a pick'em here with the Giants at +2.5, so you're better off going with Dallas there as well if you like them outright, which is the case for us here. Next up, we've got the Minnesota Vikings at the Detroit Lions. The Vikings 6-9 after getting pounded by the New Orleans Saints, while the Detroit Lions 5-10 after getting demolished by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both these teams coming off performances where they were absolutely dominated on the defensive front. And honestly, probably not too much to get excited about in this game. Both these teams are out of the playoffs and looking forward to the draft at this point in time. These are the scenarios where it's toughest to predict a Week 17 game because anything can happen. Assuming both sides play their starters for the entirety of the game, we're going to go with the Vikings to win this game because, first and foremost, as bad as their defense is, they're probably facing the worst defense in the NFL with the Detroit Lions. And offensively, okay, maybe you like Matthew Stafford a little bit more than Kirk Cousins, but you look at the weapons around those two guys, well, it's a no contest then. You've got Dalvin Cook for the Minnesota Vikings. You've got Adam Thielen. You've got Justin Jefferson. You've got an Irv Smith as well. While for the Detroit Lions, Marvin Jones, DeAndre Swift, it's slim pickings there. Hawkinson, but it can't contend with what the Vikings have. And again, with that defensive advantage as well, even though that's not saying much considering the caliber of these two units, we have to go with the Minnesota Vikings to win this game outright. The spread right now, plus 7.5 for Detroit. It's a tough number to pick here. We think the easier bet, the safer one, is outright with Minnesota, but with some of those decisive advantages, like we said, we're going to give benefit of the doubt to the Minnesota Vikings and pick them on the spread to cover too. Moving on, we've got the New York Jets at the New England Patriots. The Jets 2-13, all of a sudden on a 2-game winning streak after beating the Browns last week, something that I thought I would never say about the 2020 New York Jets. While the New England Patriots 6-9 after getting shellacked by the Buffalo Bills this last week. And honestly, when looking at this contest, I hate everything about it, truth be told. And maybe that's simply because I'm actually leaning the way of the New York Jets, which seems insane. But my belief is that even before we saw versus the Browns last week, that the Patriots were fully committed to rebuilding via the draft. And for New England, we knew that they weren't going to make the playoffs, a couple of weeks ago now. So at that point in time, Bill Belichick already looking forward to next season and how they can get better that way. And the fact is, a win here for the Patriots could very well cost them the chance to get a top-tier player. While the Jets, well, they're securely locked into the number 2 spot. And for example, if you think back to the first time these teams played, I mean, heck, even then the Patriots barely ended up getting the victory. Simply put, New England is broken offensively, and while the Jets' defense is a good matchup, I think it's too little too late for the Patriots. They're already thinking about next year, things like that. The best bet here, other than, probably not betting the game altogether, is probably just to go the Jets the way of the spread. But right now, we're also going to go out on a limb and say the Jets are somewhat, gifted a win by the Patriots here. So we like them outright. The spread, minus 3.5 for the New England Patriots. We don't have faith in New England here whatsoever. We like the Jets to get the upset. Give us New York outright and on the spread. Next up, we've got the Green Bay Packers at the Chicago Bears. Packers 12-3 after a fairly easy win versus the Titans last week, while the Bears 8-7 after demolishing the Jaguars. And hey, good news for the Bears. It's win and you are in. But bad news though, you're playing the Packers, who also need to win to secure the number 1 seed in the NFC. And oh yeah, they absolutely crushed you the first time around. And the truth is that the extremely easy part of the Bears' schedule has finally ended, and they're not going to be bailed out by the Packers resting the starters. Simply put, this is where the clock strikes midnight, and we are reminded yet again that the Bears are a bad football team with a bust at the quarterback position and an offense that can't be relied on when facing halfway decent competition, especially in games where they have to go back and forth in high-scoring affairs. Now, making matters worse here is that Chicago will be without several key secondary starters, which means Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams could feast. But to be fair, the Packers might have an even bigger injury on their side offensively on that line of all places, with Bakhtiari being gone for the season, one of the premier offensive linemen in the NFL and such a huge anchor on that offensive line to begin with. If the Bears want any chance of winning this game, they will have to expose that matchup And granted, they do have the decisive defensive advantage. What they're going to need to do is get after Aaron Rodgers. Continuous pressure. Knock him down, hit him, and force him into holding the football too long. Then on the flip side, offensively, Montgomery is going to have to carry a big load versus the suspect rush defense, which at least that's one positive for the Bears in terms of matchups. But Mitchell Trubisky will also have to be a factor here. The Bears won't be able to just rely on David Montgomery like in previous matchups versus some of the worst defenses in the NFL. Mitch Trubisky will have to, in some portion, win this game for the Bears. And that's a lot of things that need to go right for Chicago. And anytime when Mitch Trubisky is at the center of it, usually doesn't mean good things for the Bears. Right now, the spread is at plus 5.5 for Chicago. And yes, I don't think that this game will be as big of a blowout as the first contest. But at the same time, the Green Bay Packers need this game, especially in a year where there's only one team on bye. And if they have home field advantage throughout the playoffs, yes, there aren't advantages, like audience or something like that, like a public. But guess what? The home field advantage of Lambeau Field in that cold December, January weather, that's all you could ask for right now. And the Packers are going to be playing for that. I think that Green Bay wins this game outright. Seems like a better, safer pick, almost a lock, honestly. The spread, not as confident there, but right now, with it being less than a touchdown, we're still going with the Packers on the spread because at the end of the day, Rodgers over Mitch Trubisky. Moving on, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders at the Denver Broncos. Both these teams coming off narrow losses. For the Raiders, 7-8, it was versus the Dolphins, while the Broncos, 5-10, it was versus the Chargers. Now, the first time these two teams played, the Raiders waxed the Broncos, but that was at a point in time where the Raiders were actually in playoff contention. Now, with both teams eliminated, despite that the Raiders might have the better team, it's anybody's game. It's one of those wild week 17 kind of meaningless quote-unquote games. Raiders definitely have the more reliable offense here, but at the same time, their defense is a liability. So we tend to believe that the Broncos can have enough offensive success in this game and wouldn't be shocked to see a high-scoring affair here that probably both teams have a chance to win. Right now, the spread certainly reflects this thought with the Broncos at plus 2.5. And at the end of the day, we do believe Denver can split this series. The Raiders, again, we've been saying it all year, not as good as their record at certain points in time. Way too inconsistent. We're going to go with the Denver Broncos in the upset victory. As long as they can kind of slow down the rushing attack of the Raiders, we think Drew Lock can have success versus this Raiders defense. Give us the Broncos in the upset here outright and on the spread. Continuing on, we've got the Tennessee Titans at the Houston Texans. The Titans 10-5 after that tough loss versus the Green Bay Packers, while the Houston Texans 4-11 after losing to the Bengals. And hey, this is another one of those AFC games where technically the Titans still haven't clinched the playoffs, but they control their own destiny and can be division champs as long as they win on Sunday. Now, while we do ultimately think that the Titans can get the job done, the Texans aren't going to just roll over here. This is a divisional clash where both offenses can score and both defenses let up a bunch of points. So that means that this will come down to Deshaun Watson versus Ryan Tannehill and company. And in a vacuum, while we do like Watson more so than Tannehill, the complementary pieces around Tannehill are significantly better. And despite their defensive issues for the Titans, they're still better off in that area than the Houston Texans. So either way, we expect this game to, first and foremost, be a very high-scoring affair. And we're not anticipating a blowout despite the record of the Texans here, and still view the Titans as having to work for this victory. Now, at the end of the day, though, they are the more complete team, and we will ride with them outright. But the Texans at plus 7.5, they've been in a lot of close one touchdown type of losses. This is very good value for the Texans. I'm telling you, they're not just going to roll over. This is a good matchup for Deshaun Watson. And with the spread being over a touchdown, I think it's not too crazy to consider the Houston Texans on the spread. Next up, we've got the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Indianapolis Colts. The Jags 1-14 after getting dominated by the Bears last week, while the Colts 10-5, gut-wrenching, and I mean absolutely gut-wrenching loss after leading for so long versus the Steelers. That loss could have devastating effects on their hopes for a playoff berth, because now, hey, it might seem unfair, but the Colts could very well finish the season 11-5 and still not make the playoffs, because they don't control their own destiny. They need a win and a loss by either the Dolphins, the Ravens, the Browns, or the Tennessee Titans. And, that's a lot of teams that could potentially help them out. But, man, the matchups there are really bad. And ironically enough, if the Colts had just beaten the Jaguars in week 1, they wouldn't be in this scenario. But, hey, there's no changing that now. And look, to be fair, though, even though the Colts lost that game all the way back then to the Jags, we know that was a fluke, as the Jaguars have lost 14 straight since then, and the Colts have found their footing. They've gotten much better in the rushing department. Phillip Rivers looks a lot more comfortable, and they're clearly the better team. So, with all that being said, even, unfortunately, if you're a Colts fan, their chances to make the playoffs not all that hot right now. For betting purposes, we think the Colts thoroughly win here versus this atrocious Jaguars defense. So we love them outright. The only question is on the spread, because right now the Colts are at minus 14.5. But we're going to give the Colts the benefit of the doubt, as we say they get revenge on their week 1 loss and cover on the spread. Continuing on, we've got the LA Chargers at the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chargers 6-9 after that close, narrow victory over the Denver Broncos last week. And then surprisingly, the Chiefs, kind of in that same category, other than the record, as they're 14-1, but barely beating the Atlanta Falcons, and might have even lost that game if it wasn't for a missed field goal late. But nonetheless, looking at this matchup in particular, what you need to know is that the Chiefs have already ruled out starters like Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins for this matchup, and that list could very well grow as we get closer to kickoff. Point blank, the Chiefs have 0 to play for here. There's no reason why they would risk an injury. They've already got the bye week locked up, so why take any unnecessary chances? We can't blame the Chiefs one bit. Now, assuming that come Sunday, the Chiefs are essentially coming out with their B team and treating this as a preseason game, we can't advise betting on them here. That's the plain truth. While it's, also true that the Chargers are masters of blowing leads and they could give the Chiefs a meaningless game, we tend to believe that you go with the team that will be playing their starters and can have verified success scoring. The Chargers satisfy that criteria and our pick in this game. For what it's worth, we like the Chargers much more outright, as they've got a propensity to be in close games, which does make us a bit nervous on the spread, which right now is at plus 3.5 for the Chiefs. So they do have to win by more than a field goal, the Chargers that is. But again, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. The Chiefs treating this game pretty much like a preseason one. Go with the Chargers. Next up, we've got the Arizona Cardinals at the LA Rams. The Cardinals 8-7. Tough loss versus the San Francisco 49ers last week, especially when you're considering what that means for playoff scenarios and opening the door for some other wild card teams. While the Rams look also 9-6, tough loss versus the Seattle Seahawks. The reality of this game is that while both teams can make the playoffs, it could be a situation where either one also misses the playoffs. So what could have been probably the most entertaining game of week 17, as like we said, both teams are fighting for a playoff spot, is now unfortunately not quite on the same level, as Jared Goff down to injury after that Seattle game. So that means the Rams will have to rely on backup John Wolford here. Now, to be fair, the Cardinals are also banged up at the quarterback position, but Kyler Murray has already said that he will play despite not being 100%. Making matters worse for the Rams, they're also likely to be without Cooper Kupp, who is on the COVID list, and all of a sudden, their offense kind of has a lot of question marks there. Now, thankfully, the LA defense is very talented, and we expect them to keep the Rams in the game despite the absence of Jared Goff. At the end of the day, though, it might be too simplistic of a take, but the Cardinals are the healthier team offensively right now, and they have the presumptive edge at quarterback. We're not saying that Wofford can't take advantage of this Arizona defense, which is very beatable, but right now, in a game that will likely be close, we give the edge to the team with the better chemistry, the superior offensive experience. In this case, that is the Arizona Cardinals. The spread, the Rams are favored at -1.5. But since we think the Cardinals can pull this one off, we like them outright and on the spread. Continue on, we've got the New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers. The Saints 11-4 after beating the brakes off the Minnesota Vikings, while the Panthers 5-10 after beating the Alex Smith-less Washington football team. Now, thankfully, this is one of those seemingly very easy games to predict on the week, despite the fact that Alvin Kamara will not be available for the Saints. And that says a lot, because the Saints are the much better team compared to the Panthers to begin with, and now they won't have the luxury to rest their starters. Translation, we will get the Saints' best effort, as they technically could still get the #1 seed in the NFC if the Green Bay Packers lose their contest versus the Bears and the bye that comes with it. On the other side, the Panthers have a bunch of defensive starters that are questionable for this game, so this one could get ugly fast, because even at full strength, the Panthers would likely lose big to the Saints. New Orleans has the better defense, and offensively, the Saints can pick apart Carolina defensively. So with that in mind, the Saints are one of our favorite locks outright. Yes, losing Alvin Kamara hurts, but you've got Latavius Murray in there. Drew Brees is also playing. That's the most important thing. And for that reason, we're going with the New Orleans Saints. Even before with Alvin Kamara, before his news about COVID came out, we thought the spread here should be higher at +6.5. If that number has gone down even more so with the Kamara news, we would be hammering New Orleans not only outright, but even more so on the spread. Moving on, we've got the Seattle Seahawks at the San Francisco 49ers. Seattle 11-4 after beating the Rams, while the 49ers 6-9 after beating the Cardinals. And here, even though they would need technically a lot of help, Seattle have a chance at the NFC #1 seed. For that reason, we do expect Seattle to come out with their starters in this game and at least play them a portion of the contest. If that is the case, then Seattle winning outright is the bet that makes sense on paper. However, our worry is that the help Seattle needs is for both Green Bay and New Orleans to lose, which is very unlikely. So the chance that Seattle takes their foot off the gas and starts resting key pieces sooner rather than later is very possible. And we will still take Seattle to win outright, though, as they are the better overall team, it only makes sense. Health also plays a role in this game, as unfortunately that's been the case for the entire season for the 49ers. However, on the spread, we are leaving the door open for San Francisco to cover because, again, Seattle, at some point in time, they will be keeping a track of those games with Green Bay, with New Orleans. Just too many things have to happen. Again, they fall in that criteria where they are contenders in the NFC. They don't want to risk any injuries to their team. So more than likely at some point they're going to start resting their starters. We do like them outright, but on the spread with this NFC West clash where anything can happen and Seattle motivated, to keep their guys healthy, we think the 49ers actually a good pick on the spread at plus 5.5. Finally, getting to Sunday Night Football, we have got Washington at Philadelphia. Washington 6-9 after losing to the Panthers, while the Eagles 4-10-1 after losing to the Cowboys. And go figure, this game, and essentially the entire NFC East with the exclusion of the Eagles, comes down to the status of Alex Smith. And don't say we didn't warn you. We said it last week. Without Smith under center, Washington cannot be trusted and will likely lose. And look, with bust Dwayne Haskins being cut, the backup plan is currently Taylor Heinicke. All you need to know about Heinicke is that there's a reason he was the fourth quarterback option for Washington. So, with that being said, the main thing to monitor here, if you're betting this game, if you're a Washington fan, hell, if you're a Dallas or New York Giants fan, is if Alex Smith plays. If he doesn't, the Eagles likely demolish Washington, as all they need to do is probably score more than 14 points. And yes, we realize that the Washington defense is good, but every team has a breaking point, and for Washington, it's when they're without Smith. Now, if Alex Smith plays, then the chances for Washington are obviously much better. Now, we still think that it would be a rather close game at that point, since Smith will likely be very limited, and, there's other factors here, like the mobility of Hurts, that will help the Philadelphia offense. But to be fair, we do get very up and down games from rookie quarterbacks, so that is a bit up in the air. We saw it with the Eagles last week versus the Cowboys. But again, at the end of the day, if Smith plays, then we will give the ever so slight advantage to Washington. And if not, then this becomes one of the simplest games to predict. Then you hammer the Eagles. Right now, the spread, basically a pick 'em. Eagles at plus 1.5. I anticipate if Alex Smith officially ruled out, that number will go in favor of the Eagles. So if you want to get some early value for Philadelphia, now would be the time to bet. As things stand right now, we like the Eagles outright and on the spread, assuming Alex Smith doesn't play. If not, we would go ahead and flip that. So with that, we wrap up our pick'ems. Now looking at our locks of the week, we start with the Baltimore Ravens at the Cincinnati Bengals. Give us the Ravens here all day. Simply put, they hold the matchup advantage pretty much in every single area. From top to bottom, they have the better team. Lamar Jackson should have a huge day. Give us Baltimore here. Moving on, Green Bay at the Bears. Give us Green Bay here. The easy schedule for the Bears has ended. Their secondary is beat up. And Green Bay needs to win here in order to get the number 1 seed and that bye week. So for that reason, we think they win outright. Moving on, Tennessee at Houston. Situation similar to Baltimore and the Bengals. The Titans need to win in order to get into the playoffs. They've got a great matchup here versus this very bad Houston defense. It might be close, but at the end of the day, the Titans are the pick to make outright. Moving on, Jaguars at the Colts. Give us the Colts here all day long. They're going to get revenge on the Jaguars for that week 1 loss. They might not make the playoffs, but they will win this game outright. And finally, New Orleans at the Panthers. Even without Alvin Kamara, the Saints are the better team here. They've got the matchup advantages. They've got the better defense. They've got the better offense. We like the Saints to win this game as they potentially have a chance at the number 1 seed as well in the NFC. So with that, we wrap up our Week 17 NFL game picks and locks. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there, asking us questions. We answer all of those as well. And finally, if you guys want early access to these picks, then sign up for our free newsletter at alldaypigskin.com so you get these picks early on, exclusively. All those details in the description. But for now, we'll see you guys in future videos.